Hello and welcome to The Wave of Things. My name is André. Today we're trying something different. I'm here with two of my best friends, Xris and Xaron, and both are from Ukraine. And I thought today this would be the perfect opportunity to talk about a recent phenomenon in the wave scene, namely that the wave music, the darkwave post-punk music from Eastern Europe comes more and more to the West, not least because of the rise of Belarusian band Molchat Doma. I would like to talk with you about this phenomenon, what it is, how it came to be, why it is so successful nowadays. Two terms always come up when I'm dealing with this kind of music. First is Sovietwave, and the second is Russian Doom, Ruski Doom.
First of all, greetings after a long time no see during the quarantine. We're happy to have you here, as always. Where to start with the first term, let's talk about Sovietwave. Sovietwave itself would be a synth music, purely. Why called Sovietwave? Because this is basically soundtracks to Soviet cartoons, usually sci-fi-ish a little bit. Soundtrack to a lot of Soviet films was made on a synthesizer. Mainly Soviet synthesizers, very old ones, which had a specifically warm sound, let's say. It's like comparing modern guitars to the old lamp transistors.
Which time are we talking about?
We're talking basically Soviet, I would say 70s and 80s. For example, one of the most famous Soviet cartoons, I would say, would be a cartoon about Alice, a girl who travels to space with her family and meets all sorts of creatures. If you actually listen to the soundtrack, it's classical synth.
Is it like synthwave?
Very much like it's ambient, basically. It's synth ambient, and from that comes all the heritage. Sovietwave does not only hit the musical spectrum, it also hits the whole aesthetics around Soviet Union. There are a lot of people nowadays who collect old objects produced in Soviet Union, Soviet cameras, some household utensils. The most popular one, I would say, is the Russian teacup with the glass inside and the metal holder.
What actually contributed to the rise of Soviet synthwave during the 1980s was Depeche Mode. It was hugely popular on contraband cassettes throughout the Soviet Union. First it became popular in Poland, in Ukraine, in Russia. You would have bands such as Biokonstruktor emerge. This was perhaps the most prominent synthwave band at the time. At the year 1990, the cusp of 1989 and 1990, Biokonstruktor split up into Bio and Technologia.
I think I've heard about Technologia.
Right.
They look similar to Depeche Mode?
They are very, very similar to Depeche Mode, but if you know Bio and Technologia, you would realize that they're extremely similar to Depeche Mode at that point in time, late 1980s onwards. If you look at Biokonstruktor as a project, it's a very, very how should I put it, categorical and implied satire of the Soviet hyper-normalization, what the Soviet reality did to people. Basically, nobody believed in the system anymore. That's the term that describes the phenomenon of hyper-normalization, and that's what you hear in a lot of Biokonstruktor's lyrics.
And were they allowed by the regime?
They were allowed basically because they were not popular. If I'll be frank. Because Depeche Mode in itself, the whole sense Operandus Mundi, if you wish, it was basically underground. So not a lot of people knew about Depeche Mode, and as such, Biokonstruktor was the French movement.
That is one, and to add to smuggling, basically, how it was done, it was not just the cassettes. From what I know personally, a friend of my family used to be a smuggler himself. They were not necessarily smuggling it, their task was basically to acquire a record, and then what they would do, they would set up a studio with vinyl players, modify them, so one player will be reading off the vinyl and another one would be writing the actual plate. However, they didn't use vinyl for writing. What they were using were those medical cards which were used for lung X-ray because of the similar plastic material. And you would often get an X-ray of lungs with songs recorded on it. I still believe I have a couple of those at home as a collectible.
Really? That's very interesting.
I don't know if it's still there, I'll need to ask my parents.
Technologia, Bio?
Bio and also Olga Voskonyan. This was the wife of big constructors back then. Basically, she had her own synth project, wrote some notable synthwave tunes. So basically, I would say these were the forefront of Russian synthwave at that time.
Let's say playing music on your own or not folk, or let's say conventional instruments, something like a guitar or an accordion, because those were relatively easy to acquire at Soviet Union. However, synthesizer was a completely different topic.
Did they build it themselves, like in the UK?
Yes.
Yes,
like
because they did definitely build it themselves. So what would often happen, a musician to be, let's say, will find an old destroyed keyboard and have to repair it himself, because the parts themselves were rather available, because this was used generally in any other household utensils like old TVs, toasters and so on, or if someone's relative worked at any sort of production line or a factory, especially if it was something connected to technology and electronics. Transistors, lamps were really easy to acquire.
But did they have contact with each other? Those
musicians themselves might have, however, we don't know for certain.
And where was the center of it? Was it in Moscow?
Moscow.
Yes.
Moscow.
Nowhere else, just in Moscow. Was then Kiev something?
What we did have, but this was later. We did have Russia in Lviv, and we did have a lot of synth pop projects in Lviv throughout the 90s, well, throughout the 80s.
So basically, the rise of synth-pop came after the fall of Soviet Union. Main technology, all the biggest productions were always located next to the capital, meaning Kiev, Moscow, and Minsk.
Good. Now, what is then Doom? What is Doom? Doom?
Let's start with the phenomena of Russian Doom and music, as it is called on the internet. It's not necessarily Russian Doom.
I put it today in the search engine, and I saw it was Russian Doom was only the playlists.
Yes.
On YouTube. There was no Wikipedia article. There is nothing about it, is not to be found.
Well, let's start with that. Russian Doom and music is not to be confused with Doom. Doom is a subgenre of
metal.
Yes, we'll stay there.
In the beginning, when I heard it the first time, I thought it is about the metal. No? Ruski Doom. I thought it's Russian Doom metal.
To put it that way, it does not necessarily correspond with a particular music style. It can be even bard songs, something like Spleen, for example. They don't necessarily always play post-punk, or you can also catch some songs of Гражданская оборона, which was a Soviet punk band specifically. So it's not necessarily, let's say, synthwave or post-punk, but I would say post-punk is the prevailing
so it gravitates
towards. Yes, it gravitates towards. How the phrase itself, doomer, came to be? As far as the internet tells us, it came out to be on those platforms like in Russia it was 4chan, Reddit. People were making memes about different generations. Zoomers, boomers.
And
of course, then came doomers.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Who is a doomer? A doomer is someone who was born between 1990 and 2004 approximately, so nowadays it would be youth in their 20s. 20 to 30 approximately.
Youth without perspective.
What's
the doom of it?
It is often referred to as the truly lost generation, because they were too late for the fall of Soviet Union to get, let's say, some proper employment, because a lot of new opportunities came.
Well, we didn't have this huge rush as you did after the Soviet
Yes,
Union.
so there was no rush in anything. They were born, let's say, technologically native. They saw the rise of all the smartphones, internet. Received education by this point probably, and now the doom of it is basically existential crisis, because they are already too old to start with blogging, like a lot of our millennials do nowadays, or the Z generation.
I would say the doom aspect comes but rather as being born in a time when it really seems as if there are no prospects. For example, in the Russian 90s, you had the fall of the Soviet Union, you suddenly had a completely new world all around you. A lot of crime, or a lot of new jobs, new employment, a lot of new cultural influences. Everything was new and exciting. And it slowly came to an end in the early 2000s. You basically had this Putinist era in Russia, where slowly the country became more strict, if I could put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Certain freedoms were slowly being taken away from people, and people realized also something that perhaps previous generations in Russia did not so keenly realize, that their prospects in the West are not that high as they thought, or that the Western people have their own problems, we have problems at home too, so what sort of future do we have if there's no one here to sort of lift us off the ground?
So basically, this generation had a period of, I would say, rather economical and cultural stagnation.
Yeah.
So it's a resignation, basically.
It's basically
Yes.
a resignation, a rejection of the real world, if I could put it that
But
way.
is it not similar in the West nowadays with young people?
It is.
That
It is. It's certainly
want
similar.
a
This
strong
relates.
state that catches you. No?
It's not necessarily a Russian phenomenon only, but it gravitates more to Russia because it's generally colder and bleaker there.
Yeah,
Also
but now I
around
understand
aesthetically.
more
Mhm.
why it has its appeal in the West. But there's one thing, one obstacle, the language. In the West, nowadays, not so many people can speak Russian, can understand Russian, or Ukrainian or
I
Belarusian.
could point out an interesting phenomenon. Molchat Doma, we have to bring this name up again in the discussion. Right now, they are really trying to keep their popularity up because they have an opportunity to tour, to perform live, etc., etc.
what
So
are
they've
you
resorted to TikTok. The interesting part is that their fans, proponents of the content on TikTok, are not Russians. They are Western kids, if I could put it that way. A lot of them basically have, how should I put it, beliefs or worldviews that you will not find a lot of in Russia. For example, LGBTQ people, transfluid people, radical feminists, etc., etc. So you often have TikToks where people, let's say, do TikToks on themselves dancing to Suno, showing their armpits if it's a radical feminist, or some other stuff like that. It's basically sort of content that's keeping Molchat Doma's internet popularity alive.
But how does this get along with
It doesn't. People
It doesn't.
are
What
just-
I'm saying is that a lot of people in the, if I could be so bold, of course, a lot of people in these radical movements in the West these days do so because they do not see any future in the way the mainstream is going. They want to go to the fringes, and they see Molchat Doma as an outlet for that. So this ties into what you were saying, that the bleakness, a lack of future that Russian youth think is something that the Western youth also
But
feel.
for a fringe band, they're too big already, no? They had a huge Molchat Doma. For those that are not familiar with them, they were internet phenomenon. The video of the second album, no? Etage, had 2 million views suddenly on YouTube.
Just with an album cover.
Yeah, just with the album cover, nothing else. And now by now it has like 10 million, I don't know how many. And they started to tour in the West. They were here in Košice, we saw them live, it was amazing.
Hello, Molchat Doma. We enjoyed it massively.
Molchat Doma has made an enormous effort to keep itself alive on internet platforms. No other band in the Russian post-punk or synthwave scene has gone to such lengths.
You mean because of the lockdown now?
Yes.
But they were already
No,
big before.
They were big before, but they really exploded during the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that has been observed even across the United States, the Atlantic, by the New York Times even. It is a highly progressive newspaper, partisan one even. However, even they observed the rise of Molchat Doma in this whole lockdown period, also in relation to the social upheavals we see in Belarus now. They've really become huge, so to speak. No other band is there to compare.
How are Molchat Doma perceived in their own country?
They are not known in Belarus. They're really poorly
But
known.
are they restricted there?
No.
No?
No,
Is the government of Belarus aware of them?
To our best knowledge, no, because they're really unpopular. They do perform in discotheques in Belarus, but do not attract a mass following or anything. Just a moderately sized crowd comes along, from what I understand, from what Molchat Doma themselves say. In certain times, in certain towns, when they tour, we have to realize that there's no lockdown in Belarus, no restrictions are going on there because Lukashenko doesn't believe in the coronavirus, so they can perform. In certain towns, they have said that simply the local goths of the town come over and are just goth. They don't like it. Goths just stand there and don't really enjoy the music because they believe themselves to be synthwave musicians rather than goths.
Synthwave or synthpop?
Synthwave.
Synthwave. No, but they have post-punk elements too.
I would say they're quite post-punk in my opinion.
Chris, you said before that Molchat Doma and goth doesn't work together. Why?
Why? I will answer in the band's interpretation of the question you just answered. They view themselves as a band that creates dance music. Why? Because dance halls and synthwave basically went hand in hand during the 80s and 90s.
But
and they want
but there's
to
a lot of
continue
danceable
that
gothic
tradition.
music too.
That's true. However, the thing is that it appears that goth in the former Soviet Union, according to Molchat Doma's experience, do not dance. They are goth, they are very grim. At least that's how they are in the
Like
former
the metal culture.
Yes,
Standing
it's sort of.
with the beer.
It's not the way it's always been. In the 80s, especially in Western goth, you've always seen them dancing.
Yes. For
You've
me,
always had
a goth event was a dancing event, always.
Exactly. But that's not the way the culture is in the former Soviet Union.
So they go to a Molchat Doma concert, but they are just standing
They're
there.
rigid. And this is something Molchat Doma commented on as something that demotivates them from playing further at a concert, as they see that people are not dancing.
Yeah, but
They're
when
not
they go to
finding
the
some
West
music.
and go to play at goth parties, people dance.
People dance, exactly.
And this then they like.
This they like. This
Yeah,
is
okay.
basically their mission accomplished. That's why they create the music. To them, they're making Soviet dance hall
I
music.
remember the concert here in Košice.
Yes.
People were jumping around it.
Exactly.
It was very nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you hardly see this nowadays.
Also, I think it would be interesting to address the point of the whole doomer aesthetics. It's not just music.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good question, Karen.
So whenever you open YouTube and you type in Russian doomer music, which is I don't know how many editions they have,
Comes always some meme guy.
we have covered the meme already. Basically, it's someone in their 20s, early 30s, may be frustrated with life, going on through some crisis. Basically, it's a person who lost the point and feels, I don't know, say depressed or alienated, even some of them.
But when you're looking at the phenomenon of the Russian Duma, it's someone who is completely alienated from their families. If you think about it, especially in the whole post-Soviet space, family is something that does not exist for a lot of people, unfortunately. In this situation, it's different from hikikomori. It's usually someone who has a tiny bit of space in their parents' flat where they're just cooped up, shut up from everything else, and the family basically accepts it the way it is. The thing with the Russian Duma is the family does not give a damn. A lot of Russian Dumas are employed, they're not unemployed. They're not like hikikomori in the sense that their parents sustain them.
Yes, so basically, it's someone who feels alone despite things.
Right.
It does not mean that there has to be any financial or economical hardship, because some people who are very well employed, have very decent salaries, are valued.
But they're Dumas at home only then.
No, they're doomers constantly, but...
Can you see this? Can you recognize it somehow?
At work, maybe not, but the moment you see the person out of the office, it's quite clear. Headphones on, cigarettes.
Closing away from...
Yes. Basically, it's someone who... The statement is, I'm done, simply. It does not matter anymore, there is no point.
It sounds more like a psychological condition.
It is. For many, it is.
The Russian post-punk and synthwave scene, or former Soviet Union scene, of such genres, if you wish, they invoke a strong feeling of nostalgia. Molchat Doma basically is a continuation of nostalgia. You can even call it nostalgia wave, because that's the lyrics basically. They invoke nostalgia for Soviet times. Discotheque right now, basically
From the new album.
the poster song of the new album is perhaps the biggest epitomization of this whole nostalgia for better times. I think that's what appeals to a lot of the Doomer youth, because they see their parents, often who are divorced and they no longer have contact with, often speak fondly of when they were growing up, Soviet times when they had hope. And this is something that is sort of gently invoked in such music. There was a time when things were better. We can't go back to it. By all means, they're not advocating to go back to these times. They're invoking the feeling.
This makes sense.
I wouldn't say necessarily...
When you grew up in those times, of course, I think of those people that grew up in Eastern Germany. Of course, they don't want this regime back, but of course they want their memory to keep their memories.
Yes.
This is nostalgia, no? Nostalgia. They call it.
I would also like to make a point. It doesn't necessarily have to go back to Soviet Union, because of course young people are not going to be nostalgic. The Soviet Union is precisely. I would say it basically addresses the grass was greener before.
And smaller Russian towns. A lot of the architecture has not changed since Soviet times. You see a lot of socialist modern all around you. This is something that Molchat Doma addressed in the video series.
Yes, and
that the Soviet aesthetic is there, yes, with the graffiti.
It was a good video.
That basically you see it all around you. It's your entire mind space, zeitgeist, is infused with all the Soviet nostalgia. And it's something that unconsciously, whether you like it or not, it appeals to you in the music. That's why I would say that for a lot of Russian youth, the sort of nostalgic-infused Doomer music perhaps more appealing than pure funeral doom.
In funeral doom, maybe this urban facet is missing.
Yes.
But, yes, urban facet is missing in funeral doom.
The concrete jungle.
And the concrete jungle, and basically what Russian Doomer seeks or feels at the moment, let's say whenever he takes a walk in a cigarette outside, is he feels emptiness within that jungle, because grey walls all over and over, repetitive houses full of people which alienate him, or which he alienates from himself.
He knows, the Doomer knows that he sees these houses that were built during Soviet times to house the urban workers who are building utopia, basically. But these houses serve no purpose now. They're just there, and they're going to crumble, and nobody's going to repair them in a lot of poor cities and towns.
We're also here in Slovakia with a lot of those blocks, no?
Right.
But here they colored them all.
Here they color, they repair them
so bad,
and maintain them. It's not like nobody cares about them, but over there the mentality from Soviet times still propagates, unfortunately, that if it doesn't belong to you, let's not take care of it. I mean, this doesn't extend only to properties, it extends to people, unfortunately. That's why I mentioned the situation with Russian youth and their families.
The other point I would like to address, there are Doomers, or let's say generally young people who are trying to change it, trying to do something else, trying to even repair something, or I don't know, paint a mural on their own expense. What is often going to happen, they're going to be laughed at and ostracized by society around them, including parents, families and friends.
The busy won't get ostracized.
Yes. So if, let's say, in those three countries, my personal space ends at the threshold of my house. So even if I live in the flat, if I go out where my flat ended, that's my personal space. What happens around, people are usually not concerned, and if it's going to be dirty, I'm not going to do it.
Is there some kind of counter movement to that?
The whole Russian post-punk movement can be viewed as a counterbalance to that, because what I would say, it tries to bring awareness, I would say, of the situation as it is, and it doesn't have to be that way. They have become isolated as a result of not being able to create any meaningful bonds with anyone. As I said, it usually starts from the family, because...
But does this music help to overcome it? Or does it help to get deeper into it?
It can be both ways.
It can be both ways. I mean, if you're already socially isolated, it can be very difficult to keep your employment as it is, for example, to try to keep contributing to society when you no longer believe in it. So yes, this music can be viewed as possible this way, that it is some sort of outlet for people who feel isolated. When we look at bands like Molchat Doma, they don't want to say, no, we have no future. Okay, our prospects are bleak, but let's try to make something out of it. We can still make beauty out of what we have here.
Good, is there anything else you would like to add to this topic?
It depends if there's anything else you'd like to ask.
I'm satisfied. I've learned a lot. When I wanted to talk with you about that, I didn't expect would be such a complex thing. No? I thought it's much easier, and in 10 minutes we're done.
The problem is it's also sort of, I would say, postmodern subculture already. It's not anymore metalheads and goth. It's something which goes a little bit deeper into society also.
When you say postmodern, postmodernism is basically what happens when you reject any huge unifying meaning, like what you had in the Soviet Union. We're going to build utopia. I would want to say that the whole Russian post-punk wave as it is would like to reject this whole postmodern nothingness, basically. Would like to at least tell people that there is some beauty to be had, something to inspire yourself with, and not all is that bad as you think.
I would also like to add that it's probably not a way of thinking, it's a state of mind, a particular point of life. Doesn't mean
You
that the
don't
person is all the
consciously,
time.
actively try to be a doomer. You reach the state of mind simply.
You reach it doesn't mean it will go on for long. Can be temporarily. Yes.
Good. So, Xris, Xaron, thank you very much for this talk. I hope we will make it more often to different topics. Quite knowledgeable people around me. Also, Xaron was many times behind the camera assisting me with the show. So, also thank you very much for that.
Categorically, we are thanking you for visiting our humble abode. And thank you for watching.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for watching.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.